to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before this story starts, here is the part one want you pay attention to. Sometimes the biggest warning sign is not secrecy. It is disrespect disguised as honesty. When somebody tells you something cruel like it is a joke, like you are supposed to be mature enough to swallow it, that is not transparency. That is a test. They are measuring how much of yourself you will abandon just to keep the peace. In this story, the moment that mattered most was not the date. It was the calm way she said it, expecting me to make room for my own humiliation. My name is Darius Ellison, and the night my wife told me she had a date, I was sitting at our kitchen table in St. Louis cutting green onions over a scratch bamboo board we had owned since our first apartment. It was late October, cold rain tapping the windows, the kind of weather that made the radiators hiss like irritated old men. I had catfish soaking in buttermilk, the skillet warming low, and a blues station playing from the little radio I kept beside the fruit bowl. Home smelled like cornmeal, garlic, and lemon. Then Nia came down the hallway in a camel-colored coat and said, almost lightly, "Do not stay up for me tonight." I looked up because the tone was wrong before the words even landed. My wife had a sharp, musical voice, the kind that could make a grocery list sound expensive. But that evening it had a strange polish to it, like she had rehearsed it in the mirror. She stood near the coat rack, one hand on the strap of a new leather purse I had never seen before. Her curls were pinned back on one side with a gold clip. She had on plum lipstick, not church lipstick, not lipstick. Intentional lipstick. What do you mean, do not stay up? I asked. I have plans, she said. I need to ask you something. If your spouse calmly told you they were going on a date with someone else, would you confront them that same night, or would you stay quiet and watch carefully first? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy relationship drama stories that feel real, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because this one only gets more intense from here. Nia was 36, 2 years younger than me, a project manager for a medical supply company, and the most controlled person I had ever known. She folded towels into exact thirds. She color-coded her planner. She corrected restaurant menus in her head, and never forgot a birthday. When we first got married, I found that steadiness comforting, because I grew up in a loud house where every feeling arrived at full volume. But over the years, her control started to feel like distance with nice manners. Even then, standing in our kitchen with rain against the windows, I still did not think about the affair. I thought work dinner, client event, maybe something petty meant to start an argument. Plans with who? I asked. I kept the knife in my hand, but lowered it to the board. She checked her reflection in the microwave door, then looked at me like I was already behind. With somebody I know, she said. Darius, please do not do that thing where you turn every question into a courtroom. I laughed once, without humor. You came down here dressed for a first impression and told your husband not to wait up. What would you like me to do exactly? She let out a tired breath, as if I were exhausting her by noticing. I am going to dinner with Malcolm. Malcolm Reed. I knew the name before she said the last syllable. Malcolm had been around us for 3 years, a real estate photographer with too much confidence and the lazy posture of a man who always assumed he was welcome. He wore narrow glasses he barely needed and drove an old silver Lexus with one mismatched hubcap. We met him through church friends during one of those summer volunteer drives where everybody packed school supplies in a fellowship hall that smelled like coffee and floor polish. Nia said he was creative. I said he talked over people. She said I was reading him wrong. It turns out I was reading him late. I set the knife down. My first instinct was anger, but what actually came was a wave of embarrassment so hot it made my ears ring. You are going to dinner with Malcolm tonight. I repeated slowly, because I wanted to hear how foolish it sounded in full sentences. Yes, she said. He asked, and I said yes. She crossed her arms over her coat. Not defensive exactly, more self-protective. We have been circling around this for months, Darius. Circling around what? I asked. The fact that I am unhappy, she said, and the fact that you act unhappily is a scheduling issue. I wish I could tell you. I stood up and said something noble. I wish I told her to leave, told her marriage had boundaries, told her she could not dress disrespect up as self-discovery in my kitchen. What I actually did was stare at the onions, because that was easier than staring at my wife while she explained my life back to me. So this is what now? I asked. An announcement? She hesitated, and in that small hesitation, I understood something awful. She was not confessing. She was introducing a new arrangement. She expected me to absorb it. I am being honest with you, she said. There are sentences that sound moral until you place them beside the behavior they are protecting. I did not know that clearly enough then. Honest, I said, about going on a date while you are still married to me? She winced, but only because I said it plain. I did not say I am proud of it, she replied. I said I am being honest. We have been pretending for a long time. That word stung, because pretending had been my private fear. We had been married 9 years. No children, though not by design. 2 losses early, then silence between attempts, then work, then fatigue, then fewer conversations that mattered. But a broken marriage was one thing. A date was another. Are you sleeping with him? The question came out flatter than I intended. She looked at the rain-dark window, then back at me. I am not answering that. I nodded because a non-answer has a shape. She reached for her gloves from the table and said, I did not come down here to fight. Then why did you come? I asked. Her face changed for a second. I saw guilt there, quick and embarrassed. Because I did not want to sneak, she said. I thought telling you was more respectful. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not cracked, not shattered. It cooled. She left with a soft closing of the front door, and the house got loud in all the wrong places. The refrigerator hummed. The radio DJ laughed too hard at something. A bus sighed to stop outside on Del Mar, then pulled away. I stood in the kitchen until the fish smell turned sour from the milk and the skillet started to smoke. I turned everything off, opened a window, and sat back down at the table. I kept picturing the purse, the lipstick, and the sentence. Do not stay up for me tonight. Like I was a lamp she could switch off before leaving. I did not call her. That was the first decision I made that could have gone another way. I could have chased her, could have driven downtown, could have made a public mess outside some restaurant and given her a story to tell about my temper. But I knew Nia. If I exploded, she would move instantly into the role of the reasonable one. So instead, I cleaned the kitchen. I wrapped the fish and put away. I wiped down the counters. I took the green onions and celery tops out to the trash bin behind our duplex, where the alley smelled like wet leaves and motor oil, and I stood there in the cold until my breathing slowed. Around 9:30, my older sister Rochelle called, because she always called on Thursdays after choir rehearsal. Rochelle lives in North County, teaches 8th grade English, and has the kind of practical tenderness that makes you tell her more than you planned. You sound thin, she said after hello. What happened? I almost lied. Then I pictured going to bed with this alone, and I could not do it. I told her exactly what Nia said. Rochelle did not interrupt once. When I finished, I heard her inhale. Are you still in the house? She asked. Yes. Good. Stay there. Do not go chasing disrespect in the rain. My sister has a way of saying hard things like she is laying blankets over furniture before a storm. What do? I asked. Tonight? Nothing, she said. You write down exactly what she said, how she said it, and what time she left. People get slippery when shame shows up. Make yourself a record before your mind starts bargaining. I got a notebook from the junk drawer, one with the logo of the credit union where I worked, and wrote, Thursday, 7:12 p.m. Nia said she had plans with Malcolm. Told me not to stay up. Plum lipstick, gold clip, new purse. Rochelle stayed on the phone until I finished. That notebook became important because the next morning Nia acted like what happened was painful, yes, but also strangely negotiable. She came in around 1:15 after midnight. I heard her heels in the hallway, but stayed in the guest room. At 7, I found her in the kitchen wrapped in my old college sweatshirt, making coffee, moving slowly as if domestic gestures might soften the air. I was going to tell you when I came home, she said. You were asleep? I leaned against the doorway. You told me enough before you left. She pressed her lips together. It was dinner, Darius. Was it only dinner? I asked. She did not answer. The thing about betrayal is that your mind becomes a bad historian. It keeps revising the timeline, looking for earlier evidence, and blaming you for not reading it right. As I drove to the credit union that morning, I started remembering small things with fresh suspicion. Her sudden commitment to Saturday morning yoga across town. The way Malcolm's name had moved from church group to my friend Malcolm. The month she started guarding her phone battery pack like it contained state secrets. On Thursday, she came home smelling like cedar and restaurant smoke instead of the sterile lemon scent her office. None of it had screamed. Together, it started to sing. I manage operations at a community credit union in the Central West End. It is not glamorous work, but I like systems patterns, the rhythm of money moving where it is supposed to. That Friday, I cannot focus. Every member's question felt delayed by static. At lunch, I sat in my car under a sycamore tree shedding bark onto the windshield and opened our joint account on my phone. Nothing obvious. No hotel charges. No flowers. No private apartment hidden in plain sight. Then I checked the secondary credit card we use for household expenses. 2 dinner charges over the past 6 weeks at places Nia had never mentioned. 1 wine bar in Clayton. 1 steakhouse by the riverfront. I stared at those charges for a long time. They were not proof of anything by themselves, and that mattered to me. I did not want to become the kind of man who built a story out of fumes, because pain made certainty feel urgent. But Nia was meticulous with money. She questioned utility spikes. She corrected my grocery estimates. She would never forget a $170 dinner unless the forgetting served her. That afternoon, I printed the statements at work and slipped them into a manila folder. I hated how sneaky it felt. I hated even more that her behavior had turned me into a man collecting paper in secret. That weekend, she behaved with deliberate softness. She made cinnamon waffles Saturday morning. She asked if I wanted to go with her to the farmer's market in Soulard. She touched my arm twice while speaking, as if touch itself could blur meaning. I watched her move through the house and understood something else uncomfortable. She wanted the marriage and the affair to coexist at least for a while. She was not ready to lose the houseplants in the sunroom, the framed wedding photo in the hall, the familiar version of me that took her car for oil changes and made gumbo after the first frost. She wanted continuity to cushion appetite. On Sunday after service, Malcolm approached me outside the church annex where people were balancing paper plates of baked chicken and potato salad. He had on a camel scarf and a smile too loose for the weather. "Darius, man, how are you?" he asked. I looked at him and felt such clean dislike that it almost steadied me. "I have been better," I said. His smile flickered. Behind him, children chased each other near the fellowship. Then while older women packed leftovers into foil pans. "Church life continues. Nia told me y'all were having a rough season," he said carefully. "Marriage is complicated. Some people go out of their way to complicate it," I said. He dropped his gaze, then raised it again with practiced sorrow. "I never meant for anybody to get hurt." That sentence told me more than a denial would have. I could have hit him. I could have cursed him right there in front of the deacons and the folding tables and Sister Bernice with her white nurse shoes. Instead, I said, "Stay away from me after today." Then I walked off before my face betrayed how badly my hands were shaking. That was my second decision point. I chose restraint because public fury would have fed his vanity. Men like Malcolm mistake confrontation for importance. I would not give him that satisfaction. The following week was a long corridor of ordinary tasks contaminated by private humiliation. Nia packed lunches for herself. I took the trash out. We discussed whether the furnace filter needed replacing. We also did not sleep in the same bed. She did not ask me back, and I did not offer. On Wednesday night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter with a call from M. Reed. I was not proud of what I did next, but pride had stopped being useful. I memorized the call length when it rang out, then later matched it to our phone bill online. 12 minutes at 4:18 p.m. from his number, not work. By then I had started noticing another thread, Quieter but more unsettling. Money was moving. Not a lot at once. Just enough to pass as ordinary. Transfers from our savings into her personal account. 200 here. 300 there. A cash withdrawal from the ATM by her office after one of the restaurant charges. When I asked about our December trip fund, she said she had moved some money for holiday gifts. She said it looking directly at me, eyebrows lifted in mild offense, like my question was an accusation. I apologized because old habits die hardest when you're scared. Later that night, I hated myself for apologizing. The person who opened the next door in this story was not me. It was Deja, Nia's cousin. Deja cut hair in a shop on Natural Bridge, knew everybody worth knowing and half the people who were not, and possessed a gift for reading tension before others had admitted there was any. She called me one Saturday afternoon while I was changing a burned-out porch bulb. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth," she said. Her voice was low, serious. "Is Nia messing around with Malcolm?" I sat down on the porch step with the bulb still warm in my hand and said, "Why are you asking me?" Deja took a breath. "Because I saw them in Chicago 2 weeks ago." The neighborhood around me seemed to go still for a second. "Chicago?" I repeated. Nia had told me she was in Indianapolis for a regional supply conference that weekend. She had even brought me back a coffee mug with a skyline on it, which I now realized was not Indianapolis at all. I was at my cousin's engagement dinner in Bronzeville. Deja said. We stepped outside the restaurant, and I saw Nia getting out of Malcolm's car. She was holding his hand. I thought maybe y'all had split, and nobody told me. Then I thought maybe I saw something wrong. I thanked her for telling me, and asked her not to mention the call to anybody yet. After we hung up, I went inside and took the fake Indianapolis mug from the cabinet. Chicago skyline. Navy pier wheel visible in miniature blue. I stood there holding it until I laughed, and the sound scared me because it did not sound like me. When Nia got home that evening with grocery bags and a bunch of eucalyptus for the bathroom vase, I asked one simple question. How was Indianapolis? She froze for half a second, then recovered. Busy, she said. Why? I put the mug on the counter between us. She did not deny Chicago. Not immediately. She stared at the mug, then at me, and the fatigue that came over her was almost dramatic in its completeness. I did not know how to tell you, she said. That was a lie? I asked. That I went away with him, she said. Hearing her say him instead of Malcolm felt intimate in the ugliest way. Nothing happened that weekend, she added quickly. I looked at her until she looked away. You really have lost your sense of scale, I said. You think the issue is whether I can imagine one more detail. The issue is that you are trying to make me collaborate with my own disrespect. We argued until the grocery ice cream softened the bag and leaked cold vanilla onto the floor. Nia cried, but in a controlled way, wiping tears before they fell fully. She said she had felt invisible with me for years. She said Malcolm made her feel chosen. She said I turned hurt into silence and silence into punishment. Some of what she said landed because not all betrayal begins in a vacuum. I had withdrawn after our second miscarriage and never truly returned. I buried myself in work, routines, and small practical acts that looked like care from far away. But hurt inside a marriage is not permission to recruit a third person. Do you want a divorce? I asked when the argument finally burned down to quiet. She leaned against the counter, arms wrapped around herself. I do not know, she whispered. I believe that. She did not know because uncertainty let her postpone consequence. Then I will decide what I need, I said. That night I called a lawyer, whose name Rochelle got from a church member's sister. Her name was Sonia Whitfield. Family law, office near Forest Park, voice direct enough to cut paper. She saw me Monday morning. I brought the notebook, the statements, the phone bill, and the mug because by then symbols felt as true as paperwork. Sonia wore silver-framed glasses and a navy blazer, and listened without making a show of sympathy. I appreciated that more than warmth. You do not need to prove adultery beyond all doubt to protect yourself, she said after reviewing what I had. You need to stop assuming clarity will arrive before action. It usually does not. She advised me to document assets, copy financial records, and open an individual account. She also told me not to empty joint funds in a panic, because judges hate theater from either side. Think long term, she said, not wounded. Wounded people make expensive choices. I wrote that down too. It became another kind of anchor. I followed her advice in pieces. I opened a separate checking account. I changed my direct deposit from my paycheck. I copied tax returns, mortgage paperwork, car titles, retirement statements, and a deed to the duplex we had bought from an older couple who moved to Arizona. While doing that, I found something I had not expected, a folder in our home office labeled Renovation Ideas. Inside were estimates for a kitchen remodel I knew nothing about and a handwritten budget where my name appeared beside buyout amount with a question mark. Malcolm's name was nowhere there, but his fingerprints were in the timing. Nia was not just fantasizing. She was financially rehearsing life after me. Late November brought the first hard cold. Leaves skidded along the sidewalk like dry paper. The corner store by our block put a hand-lettered sign in the window for hot chili cups, and the old men outside the barbershop started wearing knit caps pulled low over their ears. Inside our house, Nia and I moved around each other with forced courtesy. Then Thanksgiving approached, and we did the Ellison family dinner at my mother's house in Florissant, where there would be candied yams, smoked turkey, 5 pies, and too many opinions. Nia asked if we were still going. I looked at her over my coffee and said, "Yes, we are still married in public, apparently." She flinched, but she came. My mother, Bernice Ellison, can read trouble in the way a person reaches for a serving spoon. She had worked 30 years as a hospital administrator and had no patience for confusion masquerading as complexity. By the time dessert was served, she pulled me aside into the den where she kept old ebony magazines and a cedar chest full of Christmas linens. "What is wrong with your wife?" she asked plainly. "She is behaving like somebody rehearsing an exit." I sat on the arm of the sofa and told my mother enough of the truth to explain the temperature without giving her details she could weaponize in grief. Mama listened with one hand over her mouth. Then she said, "Do not let this turn you mean." I stared at her because it was not what I expected. "Mean?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Not weak, not passive. Mean. There is a difference. When somebody humiliates you, the temptation is to answer with spectacle, because spectacle feels powerful. But spectacle stains the person holding it too. I thought of church. I thought of the notebook. I thought of the exact measured tone Nia had used telling me about her date. My mother took my hand. "Leave clean if you leave. Dirty exits cling to you." I almost failed that advice in December. A week before Christmas, I left work early to pick up the bourbon pecan pie Mama liked from a bakery in Shaw. On my way back, I saw Nia's car parked outside a small jazz lounge on Washington Avenue, one of those narrow brick places with candlelight tables and old posters in the windows. I do not know what made me stop. Maybe pain likes proof. Through the fog glass I saw them. Nia and Malcolm in a booth, her laughing with her head thrown back, his hand wrapped around her wrist on the table. That image hit harder than any confession because it was so easy. I stood outside long enough to feel ridiculous in my own coat. Snow flurries had started, barely visible under the streetlights. I could have gone in. I could have placed that pie on their table and watched her face collapse in public. Instead, I walked back to my car, sat there with the engine off, and cried in a way I had not since my father died. Not loud, not cinematic, just bent over the steering wheel, forehead against cold leather, grieving the fact that she still had laughter available, just not for me. When I got home, I put the pie in the freezer and scheduled another meeting with Sonia. January changed the pace of everything. Nia told me she wanted a temporary separation. She used those exact words while standing in the hallway, buttoning pearl earrings for work, as if proposing a cleaner closet system. I asked whether Malcolm was temporary too. She sighed. "Why do you always reduce everything?" she said. "Because you keep enlarging disrespect until it sounds philosophical," I answered. Then I told her I had already met with an attorney and was preparing to file. That finally cracked her composure. "File," she said. "Over this?" I laughed, not kindly. "Over this? Nia, you took another man to Chicago and introduced him into my marriage like a weather pattern. The weeks after, that were full of the practical ugliness people never talk about. Spreadsheets, appraisals, tense emails forwarded through Sonia's office. Nia moved into a short-term furnished apartment in University City with a small balcony and bad lighting because, she said, she needed space. I stayed in the duplex because I wanted one room in my life to remain honest. She came by twice to collect clothes, books, and a ceramic bowl her grandmother had made. Each time she moved through the house like a museum visitor, pausing too long at objects we had chosen together. Once she stood in the doorway of the sunroom and cried over a fern. Then Deja called again, and the story tilted a different direction. "You need to know something else," she said. "Malcolm is not just with Nia." She had a client in her chair who worked at a boutique hotel in the Loop, where Malcolm sometimes shot promotional photos. According to her, he had been seen there more than once with a woman named Patrice, a divorcee from Naperville. Different weekends. Same charm. Same scarf, Deja added bitterly. I sat at my desk, staring at the January budget draft while that information rearranged itself in my chest. I did not feel vindicated. I felt tired. Infidelity had layers, apparently, and all of them smelled cheap. I debated whether to tell Nia. That was another decision point. I could have stayed silent and let her discover Malcolm's character on her own timetable. Part of me wanted that. Part of me wanted her to invest fully in the fantasy and then watch it collapse without my intervention. But another part of me, the part not yet entirely hollowed out, did not want to become a curator of silence. So I called her and said, "You should know Malcolm is seeing at least one other woman." She was quiet, then offended. "You are trying to hurt me," she said. "No," I replied. "I am trying not to help your illusion." 3 days later, she came to the house unannounced. Eyes swollen, coat half-buttoned, breath visible in the cold. I opened the door and knew immediately she had confirmed it. "He lied," she said before even stepping inside. "Of course he lied," I answered, and regretted the sharpness because it sounded smug when I was really just exhausted. She sat at the kitchen table where all our worst truths seemed to gather and told me Malcolm had admitted to overlapping connections, as if women were calendar entries. When she confronted him, he said he had never promised exclusivity because she was still married. The cruelty of that logic stunned even her. "I made such a mess," she said, staring at her hands. I watched her shoulders shake and felt a dangerous tenderness rise, the kind that can make you undo your own survival. This was the woman I had once driven to the emergency room at 4 a.m. when her appendix burst. The woman whose feet I rubbed during our second pregnancy. The woman who knew I hated raw tomatoes and always picked them off my burger. Memory is not justice, but it is powerful. "You did," I said quietly, "and I cannot be the place you come to for comfort from the damage you caused with someone else." She looked up then, really looked at me, and I think that was the first moment she understood the marriage was not bruised. It was ending. I thought, maybe, she began then stopped. "Maybe what?" I asked. Her voice came out small. "Maybe after him, we could still—" She could not finish. "No," I said. Not cruelly, not dramatically. Just no. Then I handed her a mug of tea, because decency and distance can occupy the same room, if you are careful. She cried for a while. When she left, the house felt lonelier than it had on the night of the date, because now Hope had officially moved out too. The divorce conference happened in early March in a downtown office with frosted glass, stale coffee, and a view of the arch through a gray sky. Sonia handled most of the talking. Nia's attorney was efficient and visibly annoyed by her client's emotional reversals. The issues were straightforward because we had no children and had already separated finances. The duplex would be sold. Retirement accounts would be split according to law. The silver Honda would stay with me. Her Subaru was hers. There was one pause when the mediator asked whether either party wished to request spousal support. Nia looked at me, then shook her head. "No," she said. "I do not." Selling the duplex hurt more than I expected. Houses remember your habits. The worn patch near the sink where I always stood to season food. The pencil marks inside the pantry door, where we once measured our nephew's height during visits. The crack in the guest room plaster, We never fixed because it looked like a river on a map. On the last Sunday before closing, I walked through each room slowly with a roll of packing tape in my hand. Outside, kids bounced a basketball in the alley, and somebody down the block was frying fish. Life refuses to pause. I stood in the sunroom last because that had been the room we loved first. Rochelle came over to help me pack kitchen boxes, wrapping dishes in old newspapers and corrected me when I made the boxes too heavy. "Are you still blaming yourself?" she asked without looking up. I had told her bits and pieces all winter, enough that she could hear the silence under my answers. Some, I admitted, for withdrawing, for making work my whole personality for a while, for not seeing sooner. She taped the box shut and finally looked at me. "Your flaws are not a hallway someone else was forced down," she said. "Learn from them. Fine, but do not offer them up as an explanation for betrayal. That is not accountability. That is self-punishment." I rented a small brick bungalow in Maplewood with a narrow porch and a backyard just wide enough for a grill and 2 folding chairs. The first week there felt strange, like wearing a new pair of shoes around the house to soften them. I bought a different radio for the kitchen because I could not bear the silence. I started running in the mornings along the side streets lined with old elms and uneven sidewalks. At first I ran badly, lungs burning, knees complaining. Then gradually it became less about escape and more about return to my own body. Grief sits everywhere. Motion gives it fewer corners. In April, months after filing, Nia called and asked if she could see me one last time before the divorce finalized. I almost said no. Then I thought of unfinished things that rot when left too long. We met at a diner near Skinker where the booths were cracked red vinyl, and the waitress called everybody baby without discrimination. Nia looked thinner, softer somehow, as if certainty had abandoned her wardrobe too. She wore no lipstick. "I did love you," she said after we ordered coffee. I believed her, which made it sadder. "I know," I said, "but love that protects only itself becomes something else." She nodded and cried quietly into a paper napkin. There in that diner, under the smell of bacon grease and dish soap, she said the truest thing I had heard from her in months. "I wanted to feel wanted without having to be known," she whispered. "Malcolm let me do that. With you, I had to be real." That sentence stayed with me because it explained more than the affair ever had. Not excused. Explained. I paid for both coffees when we left. Outside, traffic moved steady toward Forest Park, and a city bus exhaled at the corner. We did not hug. Some endings do not need gestures. They need agreement. The divorce became final on a bright morning in May when the dogwoods were almost done blooming, and the city had started smelling like cut grass and hot pavement again. I took the day off work, signed what needed signing, then drove to my mother's house where she fed me smothered chicken, rice, and green beans without asking whether I wanted any. After lunch, I sat on her back steps listening to the wind move through the pecan tree and felt something unexpected. Not happiness, not triumph. Space. Clean, unadorned space where panic used to sit. That evening, I went home to my little bungalow and cooked catfish the way I should have the first night. I still think about the sentence sometimes. Do not stay up for me tonight. What strikes me now is not the arrogance of it, though there was plenty. It is how much of our marriage was contained in that one assumption, that I would keep the light on while she wandered, that my role was to hold still and make pain convenient for her. I do not hate Nia now. Hate is too clingy, and I have carried enough. What I carry instead is a firmer understanding of dignity. When somebody asks you to participate in your own erasure, even politely, that is the moment to stand up from the table. If you made it this far, then you know this story was never just about cheating. It was about dignity, boundaries, and what happens when somebody mistakes your patience for weakness. If that hits home for you, like this video, share it with someone who would have a lot to say about this ending, and subscribe for more powerful relationship stories. And in the comments, tell me the exact moment you knew this marriage was over. What stayed with me in this story was not Malcolm being unfaithful to Nia too, and it was not the legal papers or the sale of the house. It was the smaller moments. Rochelle telling me to write down the truth before I revised it, my mother warning me not to let hurt turn me mean, and that final diner conversation where Nia admitted she wanted to feel desired without being known. That is a real boundary lesson. Love cannot survive where honesty is used to excuse disrespect, and dignity usually returns in quiet decisions long before it shows up in dramatic endings. The end.